All right, welcome to this episode of the It'll Buff podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Grachowski, and today I have a very special guest with me. This is Joseph Cabrera. I love this. He's a serial entrepreneur. I love that. That's one of my favorite things in the world. Founder and CEO of CabreraToro and host of Professionally Offensive Podcast. And I've been diving into that as a podcaster myself a lot lately. And you are putting out some great information, and it is professionally offensive. I love it. But without further ado, Joseph, thanks for coming on the podcast. How you doing?
Hey, brother, man, it's so good to be on here. I'm so glad that we're able to connect and get on. And whether it's talking on the pod or just catching up whenever, man, it's good to always catch up with you. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks again for. I know you are a very busy man. You are, an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur, and so as I mentioned before introducing Joseph, we're starting a new series, right? And the series is gonna be called "So You Want to Be an Entrepreneur," and as officers coming out of the military, I think sometimes we get stuck into this idea that we have to go follow the path, get this ordained path, if you will. And there are some trailblazers out there that think to themselves, I really don't want to work for somebody. I have a great idea. There's a problem that I recognize, and I want to go solve it. I'm going on that journey. Joseph is just he's on that journey, and he's leading other people through it as well. And so I'm excited to have this podcast series starting up. So Joseph, before we dive into you as an entrepreneur and what you're doing today, it'd be beside myself if we didn't kind of flash all the way back to young Officer Cabrera, and really kind of take on this idea of, you know, reading through your bio and some of the things that you accomplished, which are incredible. What was it while you were in the military service that kind of sculpted that idea in your head of I want to get out of the military and pursue something else, and then really what ultimately made you decide to pull that trigger, and kind of embark on that initial part of your journey?
Yeah, Dan, for me, I actually thought I'd always be a career guy. And every time I catch up with my friends that I graduated from in the academy and then served with, they always say, "Hey, man, we thought you'd be the one that stayed 30 years. We did not think you'd be one of the first guys to get out."
Yeah.
And so that was never the plan. My plan was to stay in as long as I possibly could, and it's like, like we used to say, is like when it stops being fun, then I get out.
Hmm.
Although what's funny about the service is that a lot of times aren't fun, right? And so we kind of
That's so
stay with
true.
it. I think the idea of it is fun, right? But great times, great stories. But for me, I actually thought I'd always stay in. For me, it's actually a question I had a hard time. I've had people ask me that question at the beginning. I really didn't have a great answer for it, why I decided to get out. My mother was a hardcore entrepreneur, so I guess I always had that in my blood, but I just assumed I'd do it 20, 30 years from after doing my public service time. My dad was a career military guy, so I felt like going to the family business, do that for a little while, then go into the other family business, which is starting my own. But in the meantime, I didn't realize that I was going to be doing that anytime sooner than after doing a full career. For me, it was more of a calling. I had this feeling, man, I was at the top of my game, really enjoyed every bit that I was doing in the service. So that even made it more weird. It wasn't like I was, crusty and angry and, I didn't want to do this. I mean, I was having a brilliant time in the military. I was very fortunate to have great jobs, great leaders, and be at some great assignments, from Alaska to North Carolina and everything else, just really had a good time. But for me, man, I literally was in the woods one day and I had this like feeling that it was like, hey, man, it's kind of, you're kind of too comfortable with where you're at. You're almost having too much fun doing these things. You ought to consider doing something else. In my life, and one of my mantras in my life is always maximizing for impact.
Hmm.
And when I looked around at a lot of my peers that were in the service, I always knew that the service was in good hands. It's designed, the Army and all the branches are designed to move, to move on with or without you. It's how great that how great we've built that organization, how great that organization kind of nurtures their folks. So it was just a feeling. Called my wife up literally that evening and said, "Hey, I'm getting out." She didn't believe me. She was like, "There's no way. Is this April 1 or what? What's going on?" And I said, "No, man. I said, we're getting out. I feel it. I need to go do it." So that's what led me out of the service. Committed to that decision, really just kind of on faith. Had no really real reason, no like real chemistry and understanding logically why I did it. And admittedly, the first few years were a little bit, unsure if I had made the right call
Hmm.
because in a lot of ways, whenever you leave, especially something like the military that's so core to your identity, it becomes something that you begin to wonder if what you decided was really the right call. But I would tell you that meeting some of the great people along the way and really diving into that thing, that entrepreneurship, and really just starting my own path there, started to become much more clear to me what did I need to do moving forward. And that's what kind of led me to ultimately stay in the path. And I don't want to say ever never look back. I miss those days and the people all the time, but it's very clear to me now that I'm exactly where I need to be.
Awesome. Thanks, Joseph, for sharing that. I think that is one of the things that it's interesting. I think I've had a few people on here. One of the guests that I had on before you, his name's Zach Williams, and his story is unbelievable. And if you guys haven't heard that episode, please go back and listen to it because it's great. But very much the same thing. This individual, I remember when I saw him getting out, kind of like your friends were like, I was like, wait a minute, you're out of the military? What's going on?
You know something I don't know? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I reached out to him. I said, hey, like, how you doing, man? How's it going? How are things? And he's like, I'm like, are you actually out of the military? He says, yeah. And I said, dude, we got to sit down and talk through this story because this guy, he was a Ranger Reg guy, had a great command in 4ID, was slotted below zone major, right? So he was on the fast track and had great leadership. And then it just very same thing. He's just, hey, I had this calling. I had this kind of journey that I was being called to. And he decided to jump into that. And that's kind of very much like my story as well. So here we are. You feel this calling, you jump out, you get out, and you pursue the corporate world. So did you initially start out as an entrepreneur? Because I remember last time we talked, you kind of had come into some positions where you're high up in organizations at certain companies. And so did you originally start as an entrepreneur, or was it kind of, hey, let me get out of the military, let me get some corporate experience, let me kind of figure this thing out, figure out who I want to be as an entrepreneurship, and then you dove into that journey?
Yeah, no, I kind of did a hybrid. So no, I didn't jump out directly as an entrepreneur. What I actually was going to do is do what all of us, especially graduating from the academy, so we all get coached to do Army 2.0 is what I call it. Go do the JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs leadership development program, go get your MBA, walk that path, and you're basically in the Army again, but with a suit. Nothing wrong with that. This is why our talent works really well and our skills work well in that world. So I actually had an opportunity, was going to go join. My wife actually was also a fellow grad, had gotten out before I did. And so she was in New York. I was going to go follow her in New York and work for Goldman up there. And what I realized, I went to go visit her, and make a long story short, we both realized we didn't really want to be in that environment. There was just something about it that just felt like the Army again. And nothing wrong with the Army, but if we were really going to follow a calling, this just didn't feel right. So moved back down, decided to plant a flag here in Austin, Texas, and really showed it with no jobs, man, both of us. She left her role. I said, no, thank you to Goldman. And I said, we'll figure this out. I just know right now going this path isn't the way to go. So we landed in Austin, Texas, and by the grace of God, man, had a lot of great folks we met down here. And anybody who hasn't been in Central Texas just knows how welcoming folks are here. Got tied in with some folks that introduced me to an incredible individual named Gabe Krajic, who runs a company here in Austin, Texas, a fintech. And at that time, the president of that company had retired, and they were looking for somebody to fill those shoes, but more in a chief of staff role. And I'm familiar with what a chief of staff was as far as the military and politics. We use it a lot, but he was kind of innovative in thinking about using that in his company. And so just through some chemistry, I think we just kind of kicked it off well, and he decided to take a chance on me. I think he saw something in me maybe. And I think he also had good mentorship above. Our chairman of the company was Larry Ellison's chief of staff, who founded Oracle back in the day. And so he said, hey man, you need to go find somebody who's just going to be able to do these things. He laid it out for Gabe, and Gabe had followed that advice, and our two worlds collided. And I had spent several years with that company and had done everything from, I learned so much during that time. I'm so incredibly thankful for that time, and really got my, what I would say, in the field MBA beyond what I could imagine. It's like being thrown into a combat zone right away as a platoon leader. You learn a lot more in that situation than you do in the classroom. And from there, what I also learned is that it also helped me. He's such a hardcore entrepreneur. Just through osmosis, I started really understanding how the game was played, and how you started to really look at problem sets where you could add value, and really how you run teams. He was a strong culture leader. So it also gave me hope that the civilian world also had people who gave a hoot about values and culture. So that's how I got started. Did not start off as a entrepreneur to begin with, but thank God I didn't go kind of that way of going up the corporate ladder in a traditional sense of Army 2.0. And then from there, yeah, after that stint there at the company at the fintech firm called Kasasa, that's what started me down the path of entrepreneurship.
That's I love the Army 2.0. I've yet to hear that,
Yeah, man.
but I have plenty of friends who have embarked on that journey. And to your point, it's great, it's awesome. I think it's it's there's those people out there that lead the military that still kind of like to have that structure to them, right? That guaranteed of, hey, there is a path, right? I don't have to be a pathfinder, if you will. I would have loved to have gone to that Army school. Never got the opportunity. I think
Yeah,
something about
great.
being at Fort Hood and riding around in Bradleys and tanks. They don't necessarily need pathfinders.
Yeah, it's a hard sell, right? Like, why do you need this for? Yeah. If you're a brag,
Yeah,
maybe that's different.
exactly. So I think I love the Army 2.0ism. And I think, okay, so you mentioned something previously that you were just talking about, and you called it the in the field MBA. Now, Joseph is a graduate of University of Texas McCombs Business School, and obtained an MBA from that program. And me personally, and I think people, not that I don't think I could accomplish it. I'm a School of Hard Knocks or an in the field MBA kind of guy too. So you have both ends of the spectrum. To those listeners out there, because I think this is a topic. I think this is a hot topic today, if you will. Hey, should I go? There's people in the military right now are thinking, okay, the Army 2.0 corporate ladder, if you will. Do I go pursue that? Did that mean I get out of the military and pursue an MBA, or do I get out of the military, get in the field, figure it out, School of Hard Knocks? What do I do? And so as somebody who holds both of those those learning thoughts, if you will, what would you say are kind of the pros and cons of both, and how should people look at that as they try to make a decision?
Yeah, the MBA is, I think, not a requirement to be successful in anything that you do. To include, if you look at some of the top companies in the world, are run by individuals who probably barely graduated college. And so when I think about why an MBA is valuable, what I tell folks who ask me something similar, I tell them, hey, look for the opportunities getting out of the service, especially service members, that can allow you to get the most exposure, right? And to explore. One of the things we're not great at in the service is we have this kind of trajectory we get on. We know exactly when we're going to become a first lieutenant, or, is that our next rung, and then all the way down, we got our map career. And there's nothing wrong with liking that. I think for folks who know that about themselves, man, rock on, pursue. The MBA is a great route to make sure that you're hitting, the MBA is like Ranger or Pathfinder school. I look at it as Ranger school. It's like, you got to get the tab if you want to command in a combat arms unit that's light, and
Yep.
just kind of keep going. That's a pathway forward. But I do think for some of us that don't know what that is, and I think that's a lot of us, there's a lot of us who don't really know what we want to do next because we just have had no exposure outside of the service. Go with the opportunity where you feel like you're going to learn in a very candid and raw way. And so for me, as I look back on what I did, I would actually do it differently. I don't know that I would have got an MBA right off the bat. I think I would have went out there and I would have spent time driving in a van with my family and driving around. It was just me, my wife, and a dog, go driving around the world for a year. I'd disappear for a year if I did it over again. And then kind of, let the trees talk to me, let me figure out what the wind's saying, and then say, okay, cool, what do I like and what do I don't like? And then get back into probably finding an opportunity like I did with the fintech here in Austin. And then really think about, do I need an MBA or not? Because the reality of it is, academically, you can learn everything academically at an MBA on YouTube, or go buy a book at Barnes & Noble. You can learn everything you need to know there. The most valuable thing, though, that the MBA did give me, so I don't want to disparage it at all. I think I would still do it over again. I just may have decided to delay it a little bit, is the people. The people that I've met there and the network that I was able to develop there with my fellow classmates has been invaluable. And if I could only get one thing out of the MBA program again, it would be the people. Like-minded folks that have become incredible parts of businesses that I've run, investors, folks that have connected me with the right individuals, those kinds of things that have helped me along the way. So the MBA in that way is very powerful, but I don't think that it's required for you to do whatever, especially as an entrepreneur. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, will find that going and getting an MBA may or may not be immediately useful. I do think what's immediately useful, if you're somebody who's looking to start a business, my highest recommendation would be go find a company that's been in business for a few years, 5, 6 years, and ask the CEO or president of that company if you can just go work for them, right, as their chief of staff. I actually think that's the best way to learn anything because you're going to get some real raw facts about what it really takes, and you're going to get an inside look under the hood of what it really means to be an entrepreneur. So you can even figure out if you like doing it or not. You may find that you want to go get an MBA because at that point, then you get to go get the skills you need to be more of a predicted track. Or you may decide to go get an MBA because maybe that's just what you want to go do. But to answer your question in short, I don't think it's required, but I do think that exploration ahead of time is absolutely a must. Like if you do nothing else, do that. I think you're going to be in great shape.
That's such great insight. I really appreciate that advice because I think for a lot of individuals out there, they don't necessarily know right what they want to do, and that's kind of what I've talked to people through. I've talked to an individual. He said, I want to go work at Deloitte, and I also want to go, but I know I might want to go to Harvard and get my MBA from Harvard. And I was like, well, if you know you want to go work at Deloitte, like why don't you just pursue an internship path through that, or go to McCombs, right? Something like that. And so there's just all these different ideas out there where it's like they think that's kind of where it is, and I really appreciate your insight into that because especially I love it. I love the idea of if I could go back and do it again, just hop in the van. I know you got your GSP and your wife and great dog, man.
Yeah.
And you guys just go cruise around the country and just listen to the trees, listen to the dirt, see what's out there. Side note, my wife and I and our two little kiddos, we've been for the past 2 years, we've been going to different national parks, and we went to Alaska, and
It's epic.
we stayed in Denali National Park for a few days, and then we took a plane, and we flew into base camp at Denali and got out up there and just kind of it's unbelievable. You think it's one of those things. For me, that was kind of like the middle of my crucible of getting out of the military and not having a job. It's too much jobless. Nothing was really hitting traction, and I was just kind of thinking, all my problems are the biggest in the world. And then you go park this plane on a glacier at base camp of Denali, and you just look up and you're like, okay, my problems are insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And I just love that piece of advice. I think that's such a great piece of advice. So here we are. Let's now we're really kind of getting into entrepreneur mindset. And for those of you out here kind of figuring out, okay, I might want to be an entrepreneur. I might want to figure things out. I think one of the most important things to do as an entrepreneur, from the entrepreneurs that I talk to, is you got to look for a problem, right? You got to find a problem out there to solve. Be a problem solver. I think if somebody's like a problem finder and then a problem solver is really what you got to do. And so you went into Kasasa and you went to this fintech company. You worked and you kind of like you said, you started to figure out, okay, maybe there's this thing out there that I could provide value for, right? So diving into the entrepreneur mindset, what was that problem that you began to recognize? And then, how did you think about, okay, this is how I can start to overcome this problem or help other people overcome this problem?
Yeah, no, I think you hit it right on the head. I think when you first understand, real quick, last thing that you had said, I just got to make sure I put it out there. Timing is one thing for service members getting out. Just remember, you got a lot of time. I think a lot of us are up against a time clock, we think. So we got to get a job. We got to go do these things. And trust me, I'm empathetic of folks who got families and mouths to feed and those kinds of things. But you got time, and you're not behind. I've heard a lot of, especially here recently, folks say, man, I feel behind. Well, you're not. You're not behind. And the way that this life works often, if you stay something with it consistently and give yourself some grace, there is this hockey stick that happens. It might feel like nothing's happened for a while, then all of a sudden you're to the moon. So you got time. But to answer your question about how did I figure out what problem I wanted to solve, I think it was an intersection of where I thought I provided the most value naturally and also what problem I was trying to solve. Those two things are key. And I do think you hit it right on the head. The game, it is a game, in my opinion. It is a game called entrepreneurship. The game is, how do I provide value to the maximum amount of people in the best way that I know how? If you do not like playing that game, if you just want to be somebody who endures a hobby, that's totally fine. But if you're at the end of the day, if you're not also in it to generate what we call income is a way, revenue is a way is our scoreboard, right? And so if you're not into doing that, it's completely okay. There are a lot of great nonprofits. There are a lot of great hobbyists. There are a lot of great associations that need really epic folks to help them be a part of that as well. But in this game of entrepreneurship, it's about generating value. And so for me, what I realized after spending time in this fintech, I actually started, we actually started two businesses while I was there, right? And I do highly suggest that that's a really good opportunity for folks. Go get a job, it's okay. And then think about using your hours between 6 in the evening to midnight or 1 in the morning to do something else. Start testing what that is. No one says you have to do one thing until it's done and then the other. And so what we were doing, it started in real estate because I just for some reason tangibly understood dirt. Then also at the same time, we were standing up a wellness and yoga business that my wife was leading in this town called Georgetown in Texas. And so we had worked on both those businesses while I was also running and being a part of running this fintech here in Austin. And I would say that I learned a lot in those moments. I learned a lot about where and how value is added. And then I also learned a lot about, did I like this or not in the ways that I was creating value? And fortunately for me, both those things that I had an intuition about stuck with. We're still running those businesses. They've changed and evolved, but we're still running those businesses. So that's what gave me my initial inkling into where I thought value is created. But I think what's most important before you even start looking for the problem, think about first, this is why I think jumping in a van and disappearing for a year is important. Where do you uniquely provide value? What are you great at, right? Like, are you somebody that as you reflect, call some of your closest friends and your family members and say, as you looked at me when I was 5 years old or 1 year old, what did you think I was going to be? And I think you can learn a lot from that question because they'll say, you were always an entertainer. You made people laugh, right? You made people enjoy themselves. Or you were always somebody who was really good with the ball. Like something about sports just really rang to you. Or you know what? You were always somebody who helped folks. Or you always knew how to say the right thing. So it really just kind of starts, or you were always really good at designing stuff. And I think what ends up happening as years go by after that 5-year-old self, we start to get into what the world needs us to be. And I do think it's important that as an entrepreneur to come back around and say, what's 5-year-old Joseph really into? Cool. Do I like providing that value? Great. Now, what problems associated with that value that I can provide? And then I think that's how your idea goes.
Mm. That's such great insight. I think, unfortunately for me, it'd be something around, building explosives of some sort. I was a destructive individual at 5 years old.
There's jobs for that.
They do. They do. I do. But that's, again, another great point. Now, just real quick, want to go back and hit something. Just for all listeners out there, funny story. It's crazy how paths cross, if you will. I actually met Joseph at the yoga studio. It's called Brave Vira Yoga Studio. Interestingly enough, my wife and I were talking. She'd been trying to get me to do yoga for years. And on Fridays, Brave Vira offered happy hour yoga, right? And I go, all right, happy hour yoga. That means I get a beer and I do some chill out yoga. No, I showed up and they had an instructor who absolutely crushed my soul in a yoga studio. Really kind of the rest was history. And that's where Joseph and I met. So short little side note for listeners out there. It's to the point, right? It's just, you never know who you're going to run into. But, I think that what we were kind of talking about, this idea of calling your friend and having them talk to you and think about what you want to do when you grow up. I think that also can apply to what we also did in the service, right? I think, we make a lot of friends, and it's interesting. There's a lot of people out there in the service who just kind of have these desire for hobbies or whatever it is, whether that's people start to kind of get this idea of, hey, I'm kind of want to like flip some houses on the side or do this thing or do that thing. And, so I want to remind people out there, is like, especially as you're, thinking about getting in the military, some of those people, I always like to tell people, hey, 18 to 24 months out, start thinking about what you want to do when you want to get out of the military, because unfortunately it does take time, right? We have a lot of time, but it also does take time to kind of get through that journey. Yeah. And then, you figure that out. You figure out what you want to do. Now, I kind of also want to flash back to, you were saying you're at Kasasa, and you started these two businesses, entrepreneurship. That was kind of one thing that I started. So when I got out of the military, as Joseph and I were talking, and as the listeners know, I went to work for Worlds, a small artificial intelligence startup tech company. I think I was employee number like 22. And one of the reasons that attracted me to that company was the opportunity to basically kind of pick the CEO and president's ear. This is their third company that they started, right? And so I said, okay, they've obviously in the previous two sold for a lot of money. So these guys know what they're doing. They know they kind of. So I got the opportunity to go in and pick their brains on that. Now, I think one of the things that that I figured out and through this process, and one thing that you have to think about as you go through that process. And Joseph, I don't know if you experienced this as well, but I did start that side hustle, right, which is Five and Fly. And I said, I'm sitting here, and I was working really kind of as a data analyst, right, kind of a data scientist. I was, with artificial intelligence, we're training models, reviewing results, all these things, and as I'm sitting there late at night working on looking at training models, I was thinking to myself, I was like, man, I don't know. I kind of like this thing over here where I'm helping veterans get out of the military and create this community. And so word to the wise when you do that. And Joseph, you can kind of touch on this a little bit, but when you're doing that, you need to kind of set a goal for yourself, if you will, of, hey, once I get to a certain point where I'm passionate and I think this can be something that you can do, make sure you go ahead and kind of align that with those around you, especially in your organization, and really kind of give yourself that time to go full focus into that, so you're not kind of providing yourself 50-50. Joseph, I don't know if that's something that you kind of experienced or you want to provide some insight into that, but that's something that I encountered before I dove into this entrepreneurship journey.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I do think, a nuance to this entire thing as you're thinking about it. I think you have to be mindful and understanding that loyalty towards the ship, right, that you're working with is important. And what I mean by that is that you were hired to add particular value, and the captain of that ship is expecting you to be able to deliver on that too. So you got to meet those obligations. And I'm just saying, just being a good person, right? Meet those obligations. This is why I said 6, 7 in the evening, then you go to 2 in the morning, just because if you're not taking work home, then that's when you get to work on the other stuff. I'm not advocating that people go, leech onto a company and go do that. There are folks that do that. And I'm not saying that's the approved solution, but I do think that being an entrepreneur gives me a lot of, being an entrepreneur and someone who's run companies, several now, it gives me a lot of empathy for businesses that are running out there that, man, your most valuable resources are the humans you hire, and arguably some of the most expensive line items in a business. You owe it to that business that if you're going to be there, add the value that you can to the best you can. And then in your off hours, go do that. But to your point, I do think at some point when you do feel that line continues to kind of creep out and you start to go, you know what, I really think I want to pursue this more full time, that you become very transparent about what that means and how that looks, especially to the folks you work with and for. And as soon as you begin to realize that your value is being diminished at the main ship that you started at, I think it's your obligation to come up on the net and say, okay, I think it's time for me to step away. Here are kind of the transition plans and whatnot. This is what I want to go pursue. And most of the time I've found that good employers and good business owners will respect that. I mean, for heck, man, that's how they got to what they're doing. So they got to probably respect the game there. There are going to be a few that probably don't, and that's okay. Then I think that's just confirmation that you probably didn't need to stay there anyway. So, yeah, but I agree with you. I do think that at some point you got to either commit. Nothing gets done in this business if you're not all in. I think you can test things not all in. But as soon as you start to see momentum, you got to mass as much force behind that small, opening that you got in order to create some momentum if you have a chance at all. Otherwise, you're really just throwing a lot of things at the wall, and I found that doesn't usually work.
That's such great insight. Yeah, no, guys, by all means, I'm not saying Joseph and I are 100% on board of do not mix business with business, right? Dedicate yourself to your time and kind of look at your schedule of your, the company that you work for. I would say just coming from the military, most of my guys didn't come online until 9 a.m., right? And I was still up at 5 a.m. So for me, 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., I was able to kind of crank a few things out, get a lot of stuff done. And then there were the nights where it's like, okay, put the time in at night, whether that's, kiddos are down, everybody's asleep, my wife's also an entrepreneur, and she's like, hey, I got some stuff I have to work on, and so we sit in the office and then we crank out for a little bit until later in the afternoon. And I think it's also hitting back on this point of there's a lot of time out there and not getting too bought into this idea of I need to get to market now. Now there is, right? Like if you kind of go through the world and you're around products enough, right? You hear this idea of like an MVP, minimum viable product, right? You do want to capital revenue is our scoreboard, right? And you can't start to do other things until you start to bring some revenue in while you're doing the first thing. So in doing that, it's also important if you're flexing that, burning the midnight oil to make sure you're focused clearly and concisely on one exact thing and finish that, because that's not your time to be doing several things. It's you only have limited bandwidth, especially depending on what your job is, you have limited bandwidth. So focus things that you can execute on, one at a time, and that's kind of what I started to do at Five and Fly, and here we are today. We're still growing it. And then I thought I was on. I was like, I got some stuff done. And then when you're like, okay, we got to release this thing, and all right, we still have a lot more to do. Now it's game time. So as I called him a big Mighty Ducks fan, it's knuckle puck time. It's time to time to put that thing on its side and whack at it. And here we go. But that's great insight, and I really appreciate it, Joseph. Now so we as an entrepreneur, you see the problem that's out there. You want to go provide that maximum value, right? Thinking revenue is our scoreboard. Now, you left Kasasa and you dove out on the journey and you started your own thing, right? And this company is CabreraToro. So yeah, just kind of walk us through the journey of how you got to that. We talked about it a little bit before hopping into this, but kind of just walk through the journey of the brainchild and where that started and where it's at and where it's going. I'd love to hear about it and provide that insight to those out there who might be having. I know there's a lot of people out there that have kind of having some insight into to Joseph Company, but yeah, please share some more on that.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, I will say I did take so it didn't from Kasasa. I actually took a short stint.
Okay.
In another venture actually, and so as startup as it gets, a great performance running brand. And it was something that, because of the investors and some of the owners that I had been involved with beforehand, had led me to go, hey, look, I know it's time. At that point in time in my career, I had run my stint there at Kasasa and felt like I really needed to go run my own ship. And I had these things. This idea of CabreraToro was what I was going to go pursue. And as soon as I was going to go do that, I had this opportunity that came up and said, okay, before you go do that, would you consider looking at this company and this thing and see if there's any value there? So it was a really brilliant thing. I knew that I wouldn't, I didn't know at the time what really was going to shake out from it. But I always ask, the reason I mention that story is that I do think that oftentimes, again, time being, I think, on your side, there are opportunities that will come up, and it's your decision to either take that opportunity or not. We didn't really know what was going to happen with the performance room, but I tell you, I learned a ton from that opportunity, met some really great folks, built a really great team, and actually really just helped me even further understand how I wanted to build CabreraToro. And so while also simultaneously at that time having still heavy involvement in a private equity real estate company that I run today, and also we still have Bravura rocking and rolling, and we also now have CabreraToro, which I'm spending most of my time with now. So I just wanted to add that little caveat there that we did have this little short little stop here in, which was good. I just recommend that folks use those opportunities to continue to always learn from them. But CabreraToro came from a really simple concept, but highly involved, and really started from my time in the service. But in the service, I took it for granted. And I think one of the things that we get spoiled with is that I'm not saying everybody in the military is a great leader, but leadership is at the top of the game, and it's always very front and center, where I think in the private sector, leadership is a little bit of an afterthought, or yeah, we'll spend some money on some leadership and development if we have time and if that budget doesn't get squashed. But at the end of the day, it really can become driven by a lot of other factors within a company. Where in the military, that is first and foremost. At the end of the day, yes, you got to have a good run time. You got to be able to shoot well, and you got to be able to communicate with your team effectively and set a great operations plan. But you know as well as I do that great leaders seem to make just everything else buff out, right? Like if you're a really great leader, you can kind of deal with some of the things that are shy in some of the other aspects of your personal skills or even your organization skills, because you can rally the troops and really get them to commit. That a willpower is really hard to put a finger on. Nobody teaches willpower and momentum and stuff in an MBA class, but it is the thing that great leaders can do. So I get out in the private sector and I realize we had a ton of money, ton of resources, great support from investors, lots of smart people, the best tools in the world. And we're still falling short. Like, it just, for some reason, we couldn't get our act together. And I was like, what the heck's going on here? And you realize I had no idea. So what I looked at was my time in the service. I still remember one of the first exercises I ever did with my private sector team. I said, okay, we're going to just go out and the only thing I know to do right now is I think we're missing some shared suffering here, right? Things are going to connect us on a deeper level, because I realized as soon as we went home, we just unplugged. I didn't see you till tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for the morning meeting. And so what I decided to do was take this team out. And I remember very specifically doing really a good chunk of the day of things that we would consider, military team building, and it was physical, it was wet, it was cold. And looking back on it, I probably needed to be a little bit more mindful of folks, ability to kind of do those things, but they all seem to enjoy the heck out of it. And what I realized is that even though there was maybe a little bit of, anxiety and groaning there when we were doing those exercises, after the fact, there was just something that happened. That team clicked real hard. And not only did they click real hard, but it lasted beyond that. There was stories, there was laughter, and even months after that, there was always this kind of recall about that moment and about things that they saw. They didn't realize one of the teammates was actually really tough and didn't even realize that. And so I just thought that was the tip of the iceberg for me. I realized there was something there. And again, stuff that we take for granted because we're doing team building exercises at 5 a.m. for PT every single morning in the military, but in the civilian world, we're not. And so what I realized is there was something there. And as we started to explore that, especially with other companies and other teams that I had really incorporated the same logic. Other friends of mine would ask me to come over and do something with them similarly. And that's where I started to realize there was something here more than just me doing it for fun. And I also personally had missed, where I was doing some self-reflection, I had really missed that locker room that we called the military, being able to show up, get physical, not stare at an Excel spreadsheet, and be able to get outdoors and get dirty and get sweaty and help people be better.
Yeah.
And so this is what informed CabreraToro. And so now what we do as a team and as a company really is we believe that in order to inspire, one must be inspired. And so we put folks in situations primarily through expedition, whether it's Alaska, Colorado, or various other places in the world. We take them out there and we put them through our leadership and development training. We do this with executives. We do this with MBA programs. We do this with really anybody who's looking to create stronger teams and develop personally. And we put them through a really high-touch program that puts them in the outdoors, gets them to endure some really strong, adventurous things that they probably wouldn't do on their own. And then in the evenings, we always kind of boil it down and then start going into our leadership programming and personal development stuff. That's in a nutshell. We do other things like we actually got some really great stuff we're working on here right now in Austin that we're using rally racing as a way to teach people high-stakes leadership and communication. It's because we don't have mountains here in our backyard. That's really the closest thing that we can do that exudes, and I would actually say it exudes probably even more adventure and adrenaline than climbing a mountain in certain cases. And then we also just work on your good old-fashioned executive coaching and things of that nature. So it's really just a leadership development company, but it's really wrapped in this sense of adventure and getting folks to be courageous and curious so that they can explore what they're all about. And we just found, the last thing I'll say on it is that what I've learned is that, especially as executives and in the private sector, one of the things we did in the military is we practiced a lot. We rehearsed a lot, and we spent a lot of time training. Whereas in the private sector, I feel like we're playing the Super Bowl every single day. We actually don't spend any time training, getting stronger, strength conditioning. There's none of that. So this is an opportunity for leaders out there and teams to go train with us for even a week or a few days so they can go back better to their organizations and do it in a way where they can be vulnerable. Oftentimes it's tough to do in your company because you're afraid of who's watching. So out here, it's a little bit more isolated and you can really kind of be yourself and figure out what you're all about.
Oh, that's so awesome. That's one thing that I've been reflecting upon too, is just kind of like, there's just something missing in the corporate world of, it's like, what's missing? Why, granted, not always the tightest teams in the military, right? Depending on how platoon for me, platoon PT win or whatever. You
Yeah.
got squad PT, you got some competition going on. Gets a little heated out there. You got, I was a field artillery officer, right? So you got some howitzer competitions. Things get a little heated out there, but it is that crucible, those crucibles that we go through of like just standing still on a firing range as like a tornado watch goes through. You're just all hunkering together, just getting wet, and it's like this is the worst thing in the world. And I was talking to somebody. I always equate it to this. Everybody's like, hey, Danny, do you miss playing football? And I said, well, I miss the games. I don't, I don't miss the practice per se. But then I was thinking to myself, I was like, no, I actually miss the practice. I can go all the way back to, the crucible that was what we called mat drills. I remember our first, we had a new football coach come in, Coach Munkin came in, and we had never done anything like this before. I would say up to this point, Army West Point football lived a pretty cush lifestyle, right? Just, you had big dogs on campus, you got whatever we wanted. And, we're doing this. We're like, what is this mat drills thing? Well, sure enough, it was 0 degrees that morning. And we're out in Mikey Stadium. And it was, I was in a hoodie. And I think when I ended up, I was just in like dry fit underwear and a dry fit shirt. And it was still,
You guys are cooking, huh?
Oh, we were just, I mean, but it was that, you look around and you see everybody just absolutely, for lack of a better term, sucking. You're just like, what did we just go through? And it was at that point when we all kind of looked at each other, okay, there's something different about that. So I think that's, I mean, and that, but to everybody else out there, I think it's just one of those things that, to those people out there that are starting to become leaders of teams, right? You're coming into that managerial position where you're starting to lead 4, 5, 6, 7 individuals. This is something that you can instill into those guys as well. Now, again, thanks for sharing that. That's such an awesome company. I like I said, I love getting out to nature. I think it's more important to me now to covet these national park trips that my wife and I go on. We landed on Denali, and I was looking up at the top of the mountain. I was like, oh man, there was this calling inside of me. It was like, I got to get to the top of that thing. I got to see what's up there.
There's something about us humans that always want to get to the top.
That's it.
It's
And
a magnet.
it's, oh man, so we'll see. I don't know. Kate's looking at me like, no, you're no, yeah, I don't need you going up there and dying on me. But so I would say kind of another part to this. You started a podcast, you professionally offensive podcast. I've been listening to it. I've been diving into a couple of the series that you go. I absolutely love the podcast. It's to me like it's one of those things where I'm listening to it and I was like, I'm like, yeah, I'm one of those guys who I need the guy to look me in the face and be like, you know what, like, hey, you are screwing up royally, but like, here's how you fix it, right? And that's really it's professionally offensive. So now, is professionally offensive something that you kind of started on the side and it kind of comes into kind of the CabreraToro and professionally offensive overlap? Are they kind of two separate entities? And what got you into the podcast space?
Yeah, so they kind of mutually support each other.
Okay,
But
good.
the podcast stood alone for a little while, and when we started it years ago, it was started off, the whole impetus, the whole idea behind the pod was I would get calls or an email or a LinkedIn note from somebody and they say, "Hey Joseph, can I get some coffee with you?" And I'd say, "Yeah, of course. Want to pick your brain about how you maybe started X or how you decided to do Y." I'm sure very similar to what folks doing for you, Dan. And so I said, sure. And what I realized is all these conversations I was having with folks, almost 80% of them were, can you give me the 4 ingredients that I need to be successful in like a year or less? And can you help me figure out how to, financially engineer this thing and all this stuff? And I'm looking at them and I go to myself and I think 2 things. And I've always been very open with folks on this, which is I could be messing this up and doing it wrong, but it's never worked out that it's not worked out that easily.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a stumble trip and a scramble up a mountain doing entrepreneurship. Even when you get a good rhythm, all you need is one thing to slide out and you got to get back on grip. I go, and there's no secret sauce. It's really just being able to commit yourself to a basic discipline and be able to continue to weather the storms, because that's what the game is all about. And so I realized quickly, Dan, that like I think the advice that was out there, or whatever was coming on, I would say the insta entrepreneurs out there were kind of coming out and not really providing real value. And I was like, well, heck, I wish they would listen to folks that I talk to who operate companies all over because they would realize how human this process actually is, and that success is not something to be over glamorized, because it does take, folks were romanticizing it too much. So that's where Professionally Offensive came from. I wanted to just push record on conversations that were raw and unfiltered about what it takes and what it means to be an entrepreneur. And what I've learned through this entire process is one of the best comments that I get from folks or from listeners is, I appreciate how human that person was, or how human that journey was. And I think folks saying, but I'm in, or folks saying, heck no. Like, I think I really appreciate what I'm doing. I like my job, actually. I don't know that I want to live that life,
Yeah.
And so I think that is where it started. And we've been really blessed, man, to have just incredible guests on the show. Folks from Fortune 500 CEOs to just really scrappy folks. We've had we're about to go release some episodes here that we're doing what we call an Explorer series, and it's kind of we're throwing a ricochet in there where we're throwing in some things that folks aren't used to hearing on the pod, and so that's coming up. But it's been a great journey. It's been a great way to interact with other operators out there, other business folks, and other entrepreneurs, and really just incredible people. There's some folks we have on the show that don't even run businesses. They just have incredible stories. And so that's how it started. And just coincidentally enough, it also found its way in supporting what we do at CabreraToro. And that wasn't I would say that was not intentional. And that's one thing that I want to continue to exclaim, that a lot of the times you look, the dots, my wife says something that I think she always reminds me. She goes, the dots looking back are always easy to connect, right?
Yep.
But they're never easy connecting forward. And so every single time we look at these things, we always go, wow, that guy, Daniel up there, man, he just had it all figured out. And the reality of it is that none of us really have it figured out. We're just committed to a discipline of showing up every day and like, okay, well, crap, that didn't work out. Let me figure out what else I want to go do. And so I think that the podcast has really morphed into really being really supportive of what we do at CabreraToro, but that at all was not the intention. And I think in a way that's a good thing. Hopefully that comes out, because I think if it was overly fabricated, people would feel that there's some, it would be disingenuous if we continue doing it that way.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, no, that's that's kind of how that's the way the cookie crumbles. It's so true. You just, people, it's like, oh, you got a podcast and you got this. I'm like, guys, trust me, it is, like sometimes it's like, I don't even know how to explain it. It's so crazy. Sometimes you just get there and you're like, I got this great idea, and you're like, nope, that was a horrible idea. Back to the drawing board. And thank goodness I grew up as a little brother and a farm boy, so I'm used to the school of hard knocks. So I've learned through a lot of trial and error, and I've got a lot of knocks and bumps and bruises on my body, and that's so true. I think kind of just to, as we wrap this episode up, this initial episode to the entrepreneurship series, that's what being an entrepreneur is all about. Is looking at, right? It's like being a commander in a way, right? Your guideline, your left and right limits are severely broadened, right? As a commander, it's like, hey, you're driving down, you're sitting in for me, right? You're driving down, your gunnery ranges and your Bradley left and right limits are clearly defined, and that's it. But you still have to figure things out. You look at you conduct your risk analysis. You look at it and you go, okay, where are all my risks at? Okay, am I willing to accept that as I go through that? Does that mean, hey, I might not get a paycheck for a couple of months, or it might have to do this thing, or I might have to, go take on this endeavor that I wasn't planning on doing. And that's really it at the end of the day. So awesome. Now, Joseph, again, thank you so much for just dialing in and talking entrepreneurship with me. I'm so thankful for just your wealth of knowledge that you provided. I'm probably going to listen to this episode a few more times, and I always tell people, I'm like, I record these episodes and sometimes I just kind of black out, and I'm like, I'll go back and listen to it, and I'm like, that was an awesome point. Like, why didn't I say that? And but no, these episodes are awesome, and I really appreciate it. We kind of tapped on this, but one way I kind of, as I close out episodes, one thing I like to ask people that come on the episode is what was your why for leaving the military? And I think that as I talk to people who are looking at the military, I tell them the most important thing to do, the numero uno, before you figure out what you want to be, what you want to do, who you want to be, where you want to go, you need to figure out why you want to do this. Because whether or not you're going to go be an entrepreneur or you're going to go pursue the corporate world, it's a journey. It's not an easy one, and you really need to be confident in who you are and where you want to go. And so, Joseph, like I said, we covered it, but what was your why for getting out of the military?
Yeah, it's a killer question. And again, I think in the beginning it didn't really make a lot of sense, but as I had time to sit with it, it's a mantra I live by, man. It's actually a mantra or a motto that our team and a slogan that we live by, or some principles I would say, which is it came down to two tenets when I realized, and now I reflect on why I left the service. One, I knew was in great hands. I mean, as far as feeling comfortable, I think a lot of us can get a little egotistical, like, well, if it's not me, then who else is going to be taking care of all these things, right? And the reality of it is that machine is meant to run with really incredible people, and they will always be able to attract great talent and great patriots to be able to continue moving it forward. So that part was good to be able to kind of say, okay, it's in good hands. But if I really think about it, for me, we live by this thing. We go curiosity above judgment, courage above all. It's a life, it's a family motto, it's a company motto, it's something we live by, courage and curiosity. And what I realized was I was really good at really good in the military and really enjoyed it. And quite frankly, getting comfortable. I was having a good time, but came easy to me. And what I realized is that the courageous thing to do is go do something different, go put myself in a whirlwind, and explore. And that's where the curiosity piece comes in. Go explore what else could be out there. Because I did know at some point the uniform was going to have to come off. And understanding what else and who else I was, because I wasn't born as a military guy. I was born as Joseph Cabrera. And what it was Joseph Cabrera outside of the service intrigued me. And so what I realized is maximizing for impact, and that's one thing you had mentioned about the pod and mentioned about entrepreneurship. I think when you goes back to anything that we do, my only encouragement to folks as they think about these things is think about how you maximize for impact and how you also do something and be obsessed with the journey. If you get into starting a podcast and you're doing it slowly so you could have this massive audience and make a ton of money doing it and all these other things, I think folks will sniff that out. And so when folks are doing what they do because they love doing it, they want to explore that journey and be courageous and curious, I think that's a good enough reason to give it a go. And the reality of it is, especially today, if you leave the service and you realize you don't like it, you can always jump back in. Like there's nobody tells you that, but you can. You're allowed to go back in the military. It's not like the door closes. So they'll always take good people. And so for me, my why, man, in a nutshell is courage and curiosity has always driven my life since I was a kid. And for me, I came to a point in time in the military where I wanted to continue to practice that because it got comfortable. And I know that's a little counterintuitive, but I'm not looking back now. It's been a great ride. I've met great folks like you, and I'm excited to I'm excited to see what the future brings us. And whether that's CabreraToro, professionally offensive, or even just talking to great folks like you, man, it's been incredible. And I do tell folks, I really do suggest just give it a try. I think you'll be amazed at what you find.
That's such great insight. That's it to a nutshell, guys. That's it. Just diving out, trying something, figuring it out. Like I always tell people, I'm like, if nobody else listens to this podcast episode, I absolutely enjoyed it. And this is why I'm doing it. Because I love having these conversations. It gives me an opportunity to talk with people. And I've talked with a few people where it's like, I haven't even had a chance, getting out of the military happened so fast that I even hadn't had a chance to reflect on what just happened. And this episode was that. And, they're so appreciative of that. And so that's why I'm doing it. I love having these conversations. I love providing these, putting this out there for people. But Joseph, thanks so much again for coming on the podcast. You were such a wonderful, gracious guest to come out here and talk with me and spit entrepreneurship. And I already know. I look at CabreraToro and I'm like, okay, that's like, this is it. I can do this thing. I know it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of passion, but I'm willing to put it in. And I'm so thankful for you kind of paving that path for the rest of us. And I hope I can do the same for those coming behind me. For those listeners out there, this is the first episode of this series. There's going to be plenty more out there. I love getting to talk to entrepreneurs. If you're an entrepreneur and you're in the military and you're thinking about getting out, reach out to me. You go to fiveandfly.com, book some time with me. We'll sit down and kind of talk about it. Shoot some ideas out there. I'll shoot you straight, as entrepreneurs should do, right? We'll tell each other, hey, that is a horrible idea. You shouldn't do that, because we don't want you wasting time where there's bad ideas. So again, thanks for tuning into this episode. Joseph, thank you. And to all the folks out there, remember, it'll buff.